Just a quick apology guys, just for the hay fever and the sniffling and sneezing in today's video. For whatever reason, whenever I come back home to New Zealand, I get the worst allergies. And I'm here in New Zealand on a photography trip, and I have the Nikon Z6III on loan from Nikon Australia. Now, I did actually use this camera at a wedding for photography prior to coming to New Zealand. So in today's video, I want to go over the things that I really love about this camera and what Nikon really did well with the Z6 Mark III. I also want to talk about the limitations that this camera has, and also the annoyances or the frustrations I've had from a user experience. And I did actually buy a printed map to show you guys where exactly I've been on this road trip back home. But my first time filming that didn't go to plan. So I flew in from Australia to Queenstown, New Zealand, picked up my rental car about midday, and then headed to a town called Glenorchy to take this first set of photos. That was a nice couple. I actually really like that photo. I'm also really liking shooting on this Nikon Z6III. There's a couple of quirks which I'll talk about later in today's video, and that's mainly related to video. So for photography, I think the layout of this camera is absolutely beautiful. I did edit some of the photos from yesterday. The files look absolutely fine and pretty much what I would expect. And one thing I'm really loving about this lens is that you can see what focal length you're shooting at. So someone very picky like myself, I can exactly select the focal length what our eye see of 43 millimeters, or I can shoot at 28 and 50 millimeter. Another thing that's really impressed me is the viewfinder. The viewfinder is absolutely gorgeous, especially coming from the X-T5, the Nikon ZF, and the Sony a7 IV. I think the grip and ergonomics is fantastic. I am liking the flip out screen. I have been filming for this YouTube channel on the Nikon. Sorry about that, my phone tripod fell over. Let's hope it doesn't do it again. What was I talking about again? I think my only complaint about the Nikon ZF is the settings. I'll go into this later in the video, but there's like quite a lot of things that I wish I could customize. And there's also not a very good crossover between photo and video settings. I also just shot some video of those helicopters, and I'm very impressed with the performance of the stack sensor, with how the helicopter blades don't do this weird wobbly looking thing. Rolling shutter for video is never a nice thing. So yeah, pretty much only good experiences with the Nikon Z6 so far. Alright guys, before we dive into the limitations and also just the frustrations that I had with the Nikon Z6III, I need to thank today's sponsor, which is Nisi and their new Mag Pro filter system. During this trip, I was mainly just using the CPL along with the 1/8 mist filter. The CPL helped control highlights at Mount Cook, keeping the detail in the snow that would otherwise just have blown out. The mist filter also softened and bloomed those highlights. For motion blur in the helicopter blades, I just stacked the ND filter straight on top of the CPL and the mist filter to get a shutter speed of about 1/80. Without the motion blur in these photos, the blades are just frozen in time and just looks jarring and unrealistic. And lastly, all of the footage was shot at 4K 25 frames per second, and I did use the 180-degree rule. This was only possible with that ND system, and they're also color-coded NDs, and everything is magnetic, and it does have a lock which just makes switching just effortlessly. Now I use a cinema kit which includes a CPL, a mist filter, you get 4 NDs, you get a bunch of step-up rings, and you get some front and rear caps. But they do have 6 different kits available for you to choose from, which are all linked in the description down below. So yeah, thank you so much to Nisi for sponsoring today's video. I'm actually heading to Japan tomorrow, and these filters are going to be attached to my lens the whole time, definitely while shooting in the snow. Now, let's jump into Nikon's limitations and the frustrations that I encountered. Alright, well that was a pretty fun little boat ride. I definitely think the stabilization on this Nikon Z6 may be the best stabilization I've ever used on a camera. I will say that Nikon's philosophy around camera settings is very unusual and also quite frustrating, especially as a hybrid shooter like myself. I am mainly a photographer. I do film wedding videos, and I also film this YouTube channel. So on this trip, I only brought the Nikon Z6 Mark III, which I'm filming on right now, and my Nikon ZF. So I didn't bring my Sony cameras, and filming myself on the Nikon ZF and also the Z6 is quite frustrating. The app that Nikon has is definitely not as good as the full monitor control that you get on Sony cameras. The one thing that Nikon has really done that has upset me, and probably upset a lot of videographers, is not having the ability to dual record to 2 of the cards. Now you do get a CF Express card, and that is for the RAW recording. Shooting in 6K 12-bit ProRes RAW, you're going to need a fast card. That's why that's there. So if you do get the CF Express card corrupt, it is a very time-consuming and costly process to get the footage back. Now for photo, you can dual record, but for video for whatever reason, they crippled the camera and you can't do that. And then lastly, for photography, when I was at a wedding, I really tried to set up a custom function button to turn eye autofocus off or turn off subject recognition just with an easy press of a button. This is easily my most used button, except for the shutter button on my Sony a7 IVs at a wedding. The only workaround I've found is setting up a sub-menu function button that goes into a full menu system. You have to scroll down to turn off the subject detection, and then you can carry on shooting, where that process kind of takes around 3 to 4 seconds. And in high pressure moments like that, you're gonna miss the shot. So I think for photography, they pretty much nailed this camera. It's almost there in terms of autofocus. For video, it's kind of a gimmick. Image quality for video is amazing. The footage, the rolling shutter, that stack sensor looks absolutely fantastic. The stabilization's great, but they crippled the camera by not being able to dual record, which kind of excluded the camera from many other filmmakers, content creators, and even here on YouTube, where I do not want to come all the way to New Zealand and lose all my footage because a card corrupts. Alright, I just got back from my trip back home to New Zealand, and I really did enjoy the photos that I managed to capture on the Nikon Z6 Mark III and also the video footage. Now, like I said before, I think that Nikon really did a fantastic job for photography. The stills that are coming out of this camera are absolutely fantastic, and the raw files do render really nice. There is just that slight issue with autofocus not being as good as the competitors like Sony and Canon. And after reviewing some of that footage of me talking, I did notice that the 3D tracking would kind of drift off to the background or the foreground and then come back to my face. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned in today's video is how fantastic this 24-70 S-line lens is from Nikon. And I can confidently say this is the best 24-70 f2.8 lens that I've ever used, apart from the autofocus, of course. Why this lens stands out so much is a couple of reasons. The out of focus background, or the bokeh, is so beautiful. It has this really dreamy like effect that you only really accomplish from prime lenses. The flare that you get out of this lens is absolutely beautiful. There is a few photo and also video examples that you can see this in real time that I'll display now. So in closing, this camera is pretty remarkable, and I'm glad what Nikon has loaded into this camera. They just need to iron out a few creases and then they're on the right track again. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Nikon Australia for loaning me this camera, and also just being a fantastic brand to work with and being acceptable to my criticism and my own personal opinions and thoughts. And finally, if you do like the way that I edited all my photos in today's video, they are edited with my Lightroom preset pack, which is linked in the description down below. And if you're interested about the Nikon ZF, go watch these 2 videos here where I took on a similar road trip, and also my full review here. I'm gonna go box this camera up in the return box because it is a loan copy and I have to return it, and let's have fun. We'll see you later.